Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Thursday, July the 24th, which makes this the news for Wednesday, July the 23rd, day 1246 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. How do you do? I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, coming to you live from this major European capital that is currently under siege, though not under an air alert, which is interesting. I mean, this is usually the time that they go off. I see the peeps are coming in. Hey, Bjorn. Hey, Dawn. Hey, Helena. Anthony Tommy Tom is here. Hey, Nightshade. Hey, Morn. How's everybody doing tonight? You know, I should really do this. That's much better. Hey, Debbie. So, guys, we're going to start tonight. Everybody's on a breaking the like record kick, which is deeply appreciated. I'm not saying I don't appreciate it. I do. But hopefully we're here for other reasons too. Okay. All right. So where to start? So a couple things. First of all, we have no live sponsor tonight. So no sponsor. Tapping like crazy today. Well, I'm glad somebody's tapping like crazy. Anyway, last night's drone strikes on Ukraine saw the Russians send 71 drones into the territory of Ukraine. 45 of them were shot down, so about 2/3 interception rate on that. Now, the Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia, holy cow. It is quite a list. It is quite a list, boy. The map of where the strikes were looks like Russia has measles. It's just boom, 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 boom. Some of the big overnight strikes last night inside of Russia, where Russia is on fire, include Novocherkassk, which is just right across the Sea of Azov, right by Rostov-on-Don, which is where the headquarters for the Southern Military District of Russia is. The power plant that supplies Russia to them, that the power plant that supplies power to those Russian military forces was hit. I was able to confirm that was what was hit there. Additionally, railroad infrastructure was hit. What we don't know yet is whether they just hit the railroad platforms, tracks, and infrastructure, or if there was a train there and they hit the train. We don't yet have that damage assessment. Oh, hey, June. June, I owe you a video sponsorship. I'm so sorry. I will do that. I will absolutely do that, man. Sorry, brother. A third target in Novocherkassk appears to have been a miss. They attempted to hit a telecom tower to interrupt military communications and failed. Now, that's just right across the border from Ukraine, right? Those 3 hits were just right across the border from Ukraine. There were hits as far out as Samara province, where Ingalls Air Force Base is. That's like 600 kilometers, about 400 miles. There in Samara, the Novokapchitska raw materials processing plant. These guys process the raw materials for munitions, explosives, rockets, grenades, and missiles. We don't have a damage assessment yet, but it appears that there is, NASA firm's data shows a fire on the site territory of the plant. The Taganrog Air Base was hit. Again, NASA's firm data shows some fire on the territory of the air base, but we don't have a damage assessment. We don't know what was hit. Up in Tula, up by Moscow, there were widespread reports of drone activity. According to local authorities, all drones were shot down, but they did acknowledge there is possible damage from debris. Waiting on damage assessments there. Just an extraordinary night of attacks by the Ukrainians on the Russian Federation. Everywhere from way up north of St. Petersburg all the way down the map to Rostov-on-Don. Just astonishing. Now, the big news, of course, what everybody is seeing in the headlines of all the papers and all the major news outlets are the protests in Kyiv. And I got more than one email or message or question about this today. And I don't generally comment on internal politics of Ukraine, right? Like the Ukrainians really have enough to worry about without people interfering in their internal politics, right? I think if you're a friend of Ukraine, you support them in their efforts of self-defense, and then you leave those things to them, right? And that's been easy to do because they keep making all the right moves, frankly. There's very little to complain about, despite the difficult circumstances that this country is in. It's really extraordinary to watch. But the current situation does require some discussion, clearly. So there's a couple of things I think that are important and critical to understand right off the bat. This country is at war for its very survival for 3.5 years. This country is under martial law. It is illegal for large groups of people to gather simply out of safety concerns most of the time, right? Because the last thing you want is for a shahed to come into a place where there's 600 people gathered. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. So it is illegal to gather in public like that, like these protests have done. It is clearly a safety risk. If you're going to have a protest or a march, you got to have a permit. Curfew, military law, unpermitted protests, and no trouble from the government. In Moscow, a man was arrested for walking around Red Square with a blank sheet of paper. That was his whole protest. He just had a blank sheet of paper, and right now he's staring down the gun of 8 years in prison for it. The fact that in a city under martial law, under curfew, the fact that these protests, the right of the people to peaceably assemble, to redress the government for wrongs, is unimpeded, says a lot about the nature of the democracy here. That it is real, that it is intended to serve the people's needs, and it is serving the people's needs. So the top line from the story of these protests is that they can protest here. Nobody is dragging anybody off the street. There are no water cannons like we see every night in Georgia. That's not a thing. Now, sorry, one sec. Just dealing with that troll. Now, in my mind, that's the very first thing. The next thing is the question of corruption in Ukraine, because that's what this is all about. The fact is that the Soviet legacy for all these post-Soviet countries is institutionalized corruption. And so having independent prosecutors, anti-corruption investigators that can look into who's getting paid by the Russians, who's taking bribes. That's important. And it's important not just for the health of your democracy. And I would call attention to my fellow Americans who right now are watching as the Trump administration attempts to remove the independence from independent organizations like the Fed, the Department of Justice, etc., right? Trying to undermine that independence means an unhealthy democracy. That's a fact. And for the Ukrainians, it also jeopardizes their chances of getting into the EU. If they undermine the foundations of their own anti-corruption reforms that have taken place in the country since 2014, that's going to be a problem for EU accession. The bottom line here is that the Ukrainians who are protesting this new law that puts responsibility for these independent anti-corruption agencies into the hands of the General Prosecutor's Office, a position that is appointed by the president, are not without merit. These guys got a point. They got a point. And we should all be concerned about this. Now, what does the president's office say? Why did they push this legislation through? We recently saw these very organizations themselves, the anti-corruption organizations inside Ukraine, have a number of arrests inside them for corruption. Now, these people are accused of taking money from the Russians, is principally what it seems to be. If this reason for taking this control by the president's office is legitimate, then in the trials of these people, the evidence is going to come out and the money trail is going to be there. And we can see, we will see in the evidence from these hearings how the Russians influenced the anti-corruption schemes inside of Ukraine. If this is right, if the president of Ukraine is to be believed, why he did this, because he's got to protect the country from Russian infiltration, then when those trials are held, we'll see the evidence of the Russian infiltration. And this may all appear to be far more reasonable than maybe it does right now. I would also stress, right? So look, I'm trying to do the best read on this that I can, Courtney, right? I'm trying to take the guy at his word that this is what it's about, and I'm legitimizing the fears and concerns of the protesters because they've got a point too. They are not wrong. And it is important, I think, that we understand the gradations, the nuances of this, because I think a lot of the headlines are missing it. And that is the great fear in this situation, that this single action on behalf of the president's office has done what 3.5 years of Russian propaganda couldn't do, and it has driven a wedge between Ukrainians. And the Russians are gleeful about it. They are hopping on this like anything. So I would say to everybody, this is really a matter for the Ukrainians to deal with, and we should keep our noses out of it. But we do want to watch and see what the outcomes are. The first big test of this will be how the protests are dealt with. If the administration starts to clamp down on them or pull the authoritarian moves and refuse the right of the people to peacefully assemble for the redress of grievances, then that would be of concern to me. If when the war is done, if we don't see a return to independence for these offices, that should be of concern to everybody, yes. But for right now, the focus, and you know what? Another thing I would say to everybody is think about the world that Zelensky has to live in. My God. They do everything by the skin of their teeth here because the resources are so limited. And yet they have held off the Russian war machine for going on 4 years and 1 million casualties. The critics of Zelensky will say that Zelensky has become paranoid and insular. The critics of Zelensky will say that Zelensky has fallen into an insular world where he's surrounded by only the most loyal people, and they're only telling him what he wants to hear. I would argue, think about what 3.5 years of life trying to save your nation from the imperialistic ambitions of a much larger neighbor, larger and aggressor neighbor, who has tried to assassinate you 14 times that we know of, right? 14 documented assassination attempts against Zelensky. The poisoning of Budanov's wife. Every day you open the paper and some Ukrainian from the babushka in the village to some high-ranking party official has sold out the country to the Russians for a handful of beans, given away air defense systems, locations to the Russians for $200 a pop. You're goddamn right. Russian infiltration of Ukraine is a problem. That's for sure. So, Solar NZ has a great point. What effect does this conflict have on the soldiers at the front? And I would guarantee you that there is an opinion on this for every single soldier that is at the front. You're not going to get consensus from those guys. And I can't speak for them. I don't know. One reporter, who is she? She's Ukrainian. She's based in Kyiv. She gave an interview on Ukraine the Latest podcast from the Telegraph today. And she said that at the front, so this is just what she said. If I'm representing her correctly, she said at the front, the guys are just shaking their heads about the president. It's normal. It's just they're accepting that part of it with the cynicism that is endemic in Ukraine to all things politique. But on the other hand, she said, the fact that people are in the streets protesting it gives those guys hope that they are fighting for the nation that they want to have. A nation where the people can gather peacefully in the streets and appeal to the government for the redress of their grievances. So does any of that make sense? Did I present that in a way that you could follow? Questions on that? Because I do think this is important. Thank you, Courtney. Oh, it is worth mentioning. There is a footnote to this story already. It appears that the feedback has gotten through the president's office. The president has directed the RADA to draft new legislation that will reinforce the independence of these organizations under the umbrella of the General Prosecutor's Office. So there's already a move from the president's office to strengthen the independence of these organizations despite the new reporting structure. And you know, Ted, so Ted makes the point, it's more complex than any of us can truly understand. And Ted, I'm leaving a lot out here, right? Like, you're not wrong. And the other thing is, we don't have all the information. Like, we do not, there's no way we have all the information on this. So, taking the best read on it, that the most hopeful read on it, is that the people of Ukraine still have their voice. And how the president's office deals with this will tell us a lot about the future. Courtney says, are there concerns about the protesters being targeted by Russian attacks? Absolutely. Anytime that the Russians know there's a bunch of people in one place, like the Mariupol Drama Center, that's going to be a concern. Now, Dawn here says the statement from the president's office explaining it was good. And Dawn, I can't tell you how many different responses I listened to today on that very thing. Everything from your kind of feedback, right? It was good, it was clear, I understood it, to I was totally let down by it, it didn't say anything. I mean, so for my money, I'm not a Ukrainian. This is an internal matter. As someone interested in the future of Ukraine, I'm going to leave it to them. And after this war is done, then maybe we'll see where we're at. But for right now, it's too much oxygen to the Kremlin. This is the kind of thing that the Russians want. They want dissension. They sow dissension. They have a $1.9 billion a year budget for sowing dissension through social media. So please, it's the #1 export of the Russian fucking Federation is dissension and distrust. So as long as the Ukrainian people are in a dialogue with their government, that is democracy at work, baby. Inside the pressure cooker of the near economic collapse of Ukraine and the stress of this war. So, hey, JR. Well, the good news, pal, is that the whole thing is recorded and it'll be up on YouTube in two hours or so. Now, here's a question. John says, has the Ukrainian soldiers retaken the territory? Well, there are still Russians in Ukraine. But the question I think that we have to ask ourselves is, are incremental, costly battlefield advances, is that the way that this war is going to be won? Because at the current rate of advance, it will take the Russians 89 fucking years to take Ukraine. So please, it's not like Russian tanks are rolling across the Donbass. Oh, sorry, they don't have any tanks left. It's not like Russian troops are just pouring across the Donbass. That is not what is happening. Okay? You're very welcome, Smokey. Thanks for giving a shit about it. I appreciate it. So that is not what is going to win this war. We keep hearing about how drone warfare, drone tactics, have changed the nature of the war. And one of the shining examples of that is Pokrovsk. For a year, we have been hearing that Pokrovsk is going to fall. For a year, the Russian military was just outside artillery range of Pokrovsk. For a year, and tens of thousands of lives later, Pokrovsk is still standing. And why is it still standing? Because of drones. because of the drone wall that the Ukrainians have put up. Production of drones in Ukraine has increased 900% from last year. Last year, they were making about 20,000 drones a month. This year, they're making 200,000 drones a month, right? On track for nearly 4 million, I think, this year. Now, what the Ukrainians have done, Syrskyi, one of the great geniuses of General Syrskyi, as I understand it, is his ability to use the terrain to his advantage. That has resulted in a new methodology for grinding attritional advances. The Russians keep trying to push forward, keep pushing men and machines in there. The Ukrainians put up a wall of drones where they destroy the men and the equipment 5, 10, 15 kilometers back from the contact line while they are en route to the battle. This drone wall can be established using the terrain where the enemy is forced to take his men and machines through to create kill zones. And the Ukrainians have become adept at creating these kill zones. We're now living in a world where 80% of all Russian casualties are caused by drones, and where there are individual drone operators in battalions like Magyar Birds, Edelweiss, those kinds of groups, that have 1,000 confirmed kills. It's not that long ago we were talking about drone operators who had 100 confirmed kills. Now you're talking about drone operators that have 1,000 confirmed kills. It's an extraordinarily asymmetric warfare that favors the defender and is the reason why the Russians have taken 1 million casualties. That's the reason. Reconnaissance drones, monitoring those limited roadways, those limited paths to the front line, provide echelon detection and destruction before they even reach the contact, before they can join the battle. Pardon me, this has had severe impacts on Russian forces. We hear constant complaints from Russian mill bloggers about the destruction of equipment, ammunition, and food stocks in the far rear that never make it to the front, leaving those frontline soldiers malnourished, untreated for wounds or infections and disease, leading to high casualty or mortality rates among the wounded. There are some folks who estimate that, they got 1 million casualties, right? And we think 250,000 of those are outright KIA. There are some analysts who believe that fully half of all the wounded Russians end up dying from their wounds within 8 weeks or so of receiving them. As many as half. Now, these strikes on Russian logistics are a pathway to success for the Ukrainians. You cannot fight an army on an empty stomach. You cannot fight without bullets. You cannot fight without artillery support. You can't do it. And if the Ukrainians can keep shutting down the food, shutting down the bullets, we could eventually, we hope, be looking at a 1917 kind of event. In 1917, 2 million Russians just walked off the battlefield, refused to give their lives for the Tsar, and went home. We don't know that we're ever going to see that kind of an event happen in this war. But if it does, it'll be because the men on the front decided they'd rather not starve to death because the Ukrainians cut off their supplies. Now, the ISW, to bring this back to the subject of Pokrovsk, right? Why has Pokrovsk stood for a year? It's because of those drones and by redefining the nature of 21st century conflict. Now, I am certainly not a military expert. I am only repeating what I'm hearing from other analysts, or from analysts rather, particularly the ISW. The ISW has said that the Russian Federation are committing more forces to Pokrovsk in an attempt to take the city. They also report that Russian infiltration groups for the first time have now entered the city of Pokrovsk. Should Pokrovsk fall, and some folks are saying it will, what does that mean for this war? Well, if you believe that grinding attritional advances that take a little bit of territory but cost you tens of thousands of lives, if you think that that's what's going to win this war, well, then Russia's one step closer to winning this war. But if you've been paying attention, if you remember Bakhmut, which was the same situation, grinding offensives that depleted and ground down the Russian military until they finally stood a Pyrrhic victory on a mountain of rubble and their own dead. What was the one major consequence? Because the Ukrainians, of course, they just fell back to the next defensive line and started defending there. That's what the Ukrainians did. What happened to the Russians? There's no more Wagner group. Remember, it was Wagner that took Bakhmut. Prigozhin and his team down in a fireball over Tver. Done. The so-called Wagner PMC, its elements dispersed into the Africa Corps in Africa, into the Russian military inside of Ukraine, into various private military companies. No more Wagner. Yes, Ukraine lost some territory, lost a city it would have rather kept. But it ended the Wagner group. Taking Pokrovsk is going to do the same thing. The Ukrainians are going to fall back. They've already built a new defensive line, new defensive fortifications and trenches, tank traps, razor wire, etc., concertina wire. And if Pokrovsk should fall, they will fall back to those defensive positions and start grinding down the Russian army from there. Put up a new drone wall, establish new kill zones, give some new kid the opportunity to rack up 1,000 kills. That's what's going to happen. And that's all that's going to happen. Unless there is an awakening awareness inside the Russian army, whereas they stare looking upon the plain of devastation, the mountain of corpses, that maybe it wasn't fucking worth it. And that it's time to turn their guns on the real enemy, the Kremlin. So it looks like, so guys, here's the thing. When it comes to these protests, I think we should write it off and let the Ukrainians deal with it themselves and stay out of it. I have very little opinion on it, I gotta tell you. And when it comes to the war, should Pokrovsk fall, know that taking a few more square kilometers is not what's going to decide this war. It's the deep strikes behind the lines that disrupt the Russian economy and Russian logistics that are going to win this war. Do I think the Huffman guy from Texas is gone? Yeah. Kausen, I absolutely do. This guy left Texas because it was too woke for him. and he went to Russia. Then he joined the Russian army to fast track their citizenship. And now his wife is not getting any payments. And apparently when the payment stops, it means because your guy's gone. So, yeah, I'm sure he's gone. I'm sure the wife now is left in Russia with 3 children, a widow, and but at least she doesn't have to worry about rainbow storytelling time with RuPaul, because that was too much for her. I mean, really, give me a fucking break, you assholes. I encourage them. You know, Van, it's not even a joke. You know what they're giving out these days with the potatoes? Meat grinders. It's not even a joke. There's pictures all over the internet. Do a Google search. Well, you're welcome, PH. Thanks for dropping by. I smell a juicy 60 Minutes episode. I mean, basically the same thing happens to all these idiots that leave America and go to Russia thinking it's going to be better. These people never wake up. Forget it. They don't live in reality. I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, it's getting late and we have more to talk about here. We talked about the hits on Russian infrastructure last night. In terms of the front line, Russian mill bloggers are complaining about Ukrainian incursions into Kursk again. So this is south of Glishkovo. The Ukrainians keep making these cross-border incursions, which appear to be a tactic of General Syrski's. I mean, he told us as much in a recent interview with Ukrainska Pravda. Ukrainiform. That was an interview with Syrsky in Ukrainiform about 3 weeks ago. He said specifically that these attacks inside of Russian territory are intended to pin Russian troops inside Russia. You know, we kept hearing about 65,000 Russian troops massed in Kursk, ready to invade Sumy. No. 65,000 Russian troops pinned in Kursk because they have to be there to fight the Ukrainians that keep invading Kursk. And the activity there has really heated up. Cross-border incursions of the 47th Mechanized Brigade have retaken Russian military positions in Kursk region. So just across the border south of Glishkovo. The 425th Separate Assault Battalion has a fresh batch of POWs to refresh the exchange bank with. Bunch of folks captured there in Kursk. Lots of pressure in Toretsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and heavy fighting in Chasiv Yar, but no real advances on either side. Just some positions swapped back and forth. Bad news for the Ukrainian Air Force today. One of the Mirages, the French Mirages, was lost. It was on a combat mission. It appears that the official statement from the Ukrainian Air Force says that this was a technical malfunction. It was not the pilot's fault. Apparently, the pilot suffered some kind of a technical malfunction during a combat mission. He was then directed to eject, but before ejecting, he took the time to direct the plane to a crash site far from any civilians or population centers. So he flew the plane to some place where it could fall in a field. Then, once it was on course to do that, he ejected safely. So thank God the pilot is all right. Look, equipment's going to get lost. It's an active combat zone. Nobody expects any of this equipment, or nobody expects all of this equipment to survive this war. The Mirages are not new, right? They're I don't know how old they are. I think they're about 40 years old. So they're not new, and despite having been retrofitted for the Ukrainians, shit happens. And it appears that that's the case here. So they lost one of the Mirages today. In Istanbul, the so-called peace negotiations have begun again. The Russians, of course, are pushing for a bunch of unrealistic, delusional, maximalist goals. They are pushing for things that it's so insane, right? Like they want Ukraine to be completely demilitarized. They want it to have an army no more than 60,000 men. Why does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Who else in the region has a military with only 60,000 troops in it? Anybody? Bueller? First Mirages were 78, so 40 years, yeah. Potato King Land, thank you, Lars. Belarus, Roy Daniels, Belarus. Exactly. So they want the Zelensky administration out of power. They want the army reduced to 60,000 and all weapon shipments from the West to stop. They want the complete capitulation of Ukraine, as if that was a thing that was going to happen. You've got to be kidding me. So the Ukrainians, for their part, are expected to push for an immediate ceasefire, the return of POWs, the return of the stolen children, and a leadership meeting between Putin and Zelensky. Now, of all of those things, what do you think is actually going to happen? The POW exchange. There'll be an announcement of another 1,000 POWs or something, hopefully a big number like that. And a bunch of Ukrainians, thank God, by the grace of God, will be able to come home. And a bunch of Russians will be able to have the chance to get sent back to the front again. But I don't expect anything else to come of these talks than another POW exchange. Russia media is calling for war with Azerbaijan. Everybody knows Azerbaijan is a domino to watch, right? They are standing up to Russia more and more every day. They were pretty neutral in this war for a long time. Now, recently, the situation has changed, and they've openly declared support for Ukraine and told Russia to go fuck itself. And in response, Russia is calling for war with Azerbaijan. Dear God, I hope they do it. All that Russia has to do is open another front in this war. And it'll be just like the mistake that Germany made when it turned around and attacked the Soviet Union in, when was that, 1943 or 44, something like that. Anyway. All right, so that's it for me for the top line news today. Questions, comments. I had no sponsor tonight, guys. If anybody can sponsor live, the PayPal's in the description. I have no sponsors for tomorrow or Friday or next week. So if anybody can sponsor live, that would really be appreciated. James, thanks for subscribing. There are a couple of people who subscribe here on TikTok, and I appreciate you guys. I keep trying to make videos for you, but nobody ever watches the subscriber-only videos. I don't get it. You would think that so if you're a subscriber, you would think the algorithm would just post anything for you to your FYP page. But they didn't. I forgot your Patreon, Ben? What do you mean? Where are they getting all the materials to make all these drones? Well, I think mostly they're 3D printed. I think many of the components are 3D printed. And so that's like a basic I guess there's a bunch of different composite materials that you can use for that. A lot of the materials are made right here in Ukraine. The fiber optic drone spools, for example, those are made here. Yeah, Ben, but weren't you our sponsor last week? Didn't I? You were our sponsor last Wednesday. I'm pretty sure. Wasn't Ben Tilley our live sponsor last Wednesday or Thursday? Does anybody remember? So, Ben, I apologize if that's true. I will go back and I will check. Hey, Samso. Samso has a witty response to Natasha from Russia. Check it out. I apologize, Ben, if that's true. Well, how about this? Why don't we just say Ben Tilley is the sponsor of tonight's live? Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. No worries. No worries. It's my fault, I'm sure. Hey, Jeff Robbins. So big thanks to Ben Tilley, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. If anybody wants to sponsor live, PayPal's in the description. Technology is building them for Ukraine with help from PA. I don't know what that means, 420. Thanks, Ben. Guys, you know, I could not do this without the Patreon guys. I couldn't. And Ben is referring to the fact that, normally people do live sponsorships separately from the Patreon. But I recently made an offer that Ben took me up on and one other person took me up on. And I said, if you pay a year up front, you'll get a live sponsorship. If you join the Sea Babies level, even though it's the 23rd of the month or whatever, you will get a video sponsorship this month. So June joined the Patreon at the Sea Babies level, so I owe him a video sponsorship. Ben Tilley joined the Patreon and paid the year up front, and so he gets a live sponsorship and my public gratitude, because I literally could not do this without the support of the live sponsors and the Patreon folks. Couldn't do it. So I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you, Ben. Roy. Of course not. God, I haven't thought of Jennifer Tilley in a million years, but she was a charmer, boy. She was a charmer. Is a charmer, I'm sure. I don't know what she's doing these days. So, guys, questions, comments, points of observation. We have 10 minutes left. Big thanks to Lars, who has the Discord server. Big thanks to Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces. Big thanks to the moderator team, best moderator team on the Tickety Talk. And, of course, to Ben Tilley, the sponsor of tonight's live. Why is Odessa being hit so hard lately? It's not lately, babe. Odessa has been the target of Russian aggression from day one. Why? Because Russia intended to steal all of the land along the Black Sea all the way to Odessa. Russians believe Odessa is a Russian city. There is nothing Ukraine about it. Now, that is not true. Odessa is perhaps a more cosmopolitan, more European city than much of Ukraine, but it is certainly not a Russian city. Now, why do they want to get all the way to Odessa? Why do they want the whole Black Sea coast? For a couple of reasons. First of all, having all the port infrastructure gives you control of the Black Sea. And then Nightshade hits it on the head there with number 2. It's physically attached to Moldova. And there's a breakaway Russian-controlled republic in Moldova called Transnistria, where there's 1,500 Russian troops right now, plus a lot of ammo. It was a storage and production industrial zone for the USSR. And there's a lot of ammo there from the USSR days that the Russians would like to get their hands on and use it to murder Moldovans. And so they want to get right to Odessa so that they can just go across the border and subvert Moldova. And from there, you're right next door to Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania so that you can keep moving east. Steve makes the point that the ammo that's in Transnistria is old, has not been well maintained, and is likely unstable. And I'm certain that Steve is correct, that much of it is. Any truth? Oh yeah, they want Kherson. They hated giving up Kherson City, boy. So much so that today they use Kherson City civilians as training grounds for drone operators to hunt humans. It's obscene. Any truth about Russians' bottled water being contaminated? My understanding, Maggie, is that one of the partisan groups, I want to say the I, but it might not have been the I, or maybe I'm not sure. But one of the partisan groups is apparently got a bunch of poisoned bottled water into a troop concentration, and they poisoned, I think, about 200 guys. Now, I don't know what the mortality rate was. The companies were taken out of action for some time. Some of them did pass, to the best of my knowledge. Most of them survived. I mean, it's hardly the first time the eye has poisoned a bunch of Russians. There were 22 staff members of the Black Sea Fleet, all command level officers, that were poisoned to death at a state dinner about 2 years ago. Ask me to stay. What are we at? We're at oh my God. You guys are the best. 200, what are we at? 218,000? 219,000? That's 10,000 more than last night. Instead of staying late, I think we should quit early and congratulate ourselves. What do you say? Good for you, Anthony, Tommy, Tom. You did your bit, pal. Feisty's been ordering you around, has she? Well, yeah, she does that. The name is well earned. Hey, Chef Deb. Thanks, Van. Stay cool. I hear it's hot and humid. It's hot and it's wet. It's nice of you with a lady. Ain't no good if you're in the jungle. Yes, Roy, they do. They certainly do. Cheers, Bip. So big thanks to Ben Tilley, who was the sponsor of tonight's live. Big thanks to Lars, who has the Discord server. Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces. Everybody check out Samso after this. And check out his video about Natasha from Russia. If you don't subscribe, if you don't follow Nightshade, I encourage you to give him a follow. He's always got good shit up there. Nicola, I did talk to our buddy Bobby, and he just needs a break from the war for his own mental health. And, you know, I want to say that's a good move. Everybody here could easily ignore the reality of this war. But every night you tune in to stay informed. And you deserve credit for that, because it's too easy to shut it out. But there's a lot of shit going on, especially in the United States right now. And if you need to focus on what's in your life, then that's what you need to do. So I totally support Bobby in that. Bobby is a huge friend of this channel, and I don't have enough good things to say about him. And I'm glad he's well, like he's healthy, and he's doing something to take care of himself. That's good. Night, June. I'll take care of that tomorrow. Absolutely. 225,000 is the new. Well, I guess that's... Wait, dude, I'm seeing 239,000. Mine says 240 now. Okay. So somebody said, tell us a joke. Here's a joke. So I'm sitting in a bar over here the other day, and the door opens, and some guy sticks his head in, and all he said, he yells into the bar, all Russians are assholes. And he disappeared. But a guy at the end of the bar, a little drunk, he stands up and he says, I object to that association. And the bartender looks at him and says, Artem, are you Russian? And he says, no, Artem, I'm an asshole, and I will not be associated with those people. Ukraine is the dam. We have to protect them. I agree, Anthony. You are right about that. All right, kids. So we're at 247.5, and there are 2 minutes left. So, all right, I tell you what, I will join in, and let's make it 2:50, and then we will call it a night. We have 60 seconds. I'm not going to stay late for this, but we have 60 seconds. Let's do it. This is ridiculous. Oh, this is not what I signed up for. Somebody asked what my opinion of Zelensky was. People are complicated. You know? All right, we're there. 254,000 almost. People are complicated. The pressures on this man in this war, everything from his dressing down at the White House, pun intended, to the internal betrayals that happen every day from traitors and collaborators and sellouts. Makes the whole situation nearly impossible. And yet, the tenacity, the bravery, the consistency, the integrity, and the ingenuity of the Ukrainian people keep a diverse society functioning and the enemy at bay. And I think all of that is a miracle that we should all be celebrating. All right. Good night, everybody. All of that is a miracle that we should all be celebrating. All right. Good night, everybody. Make it a great day. Thanks, Chef Deb. Your kind words are very much appreciated. They are, Court. They are. Night, Jeff. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'll make a point of sharing Samso's Natasha thing so it's easy to find. Take care, everybody.